My brother and mother stood in the hallway, grinning as they handed me a homemade eviction notice, claiming they had secretly transferred the deed to my brother's name. I didn't scream. I just touched the phone in my pocket, knowing they had made a mistake that would cost them everything. The silence in the house was usually my favorite part of the day, but that Tuesday, it felt heavy, almost suffocating. I was lying on the vintage velvet sofa in the main sitting room, a cold compress pressed against my forehead. The flu had swept through my office like a brush fire, and despite my best efforts to quarantine myself in the back wing of the estate, it had found me. My limbs felt like they were filled with lead, and the simple act of lifting my head required a conscious negotiation with gravity. I had inherited my grandparents' estate 6 months ago. It was a sprawling, historic property that sat on 4 acres of manicured gardens, a place that held every significant memory of my childhood. It was also a place that required an immense amount of work. Between my job as a forensic accountant and managing the upkeep of the house, I was stretched thin, but it was a labor of love. It was a promise I had made to my grandfather in his final moments: keep it safe, keep it standing. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the rain tapping against the large bay windows. I was drifting into a feverish doze when the sound of the front door being thrown open shattered the peace. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't the polite chime of the doorbell. It was the heavy, presumptuous thud of the heavy oak door slamming against the stopper, followed by the clatter of shoes on the hardwood foyer. "Hello, anyone home, or is the princess sleeping in?" The voice belonged to Ryan, my younger brother. I groaned, pulling the compress off my eyes. I hadn't invited them. I hadn't spoken to Ryan or my mother, Deborah, in 3 weeks, not since the last time they had come over to ask for a loan to cover Ryan's gambling debts. "In here," I called out, my voice raspy and weak. I tried to sit up, adjusting the throw blanket around my shoulders, shivering slightly as the damp draft from the open door snaked its way into the room. Ryan strode in first, wearing a leather jacket that looked brand new and far too expensive for someone who claimed to be unemployed. Deborah followed close behind him, clutching an oversized purse, her lips painted a bright, aggressive shade of red that clashed with the somber mood of the house. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't look at the medicine bottles on the coffee table or the pale, sweaty sheen on my face. They looked triumphant. There was an energy radiating off them that set my nerves on edge, a kind of manic, suppressed glee that I usually associated with Ryan thinking he had won a scratch-off ticket. "You look terrible," Deborah said, though her tone lacked any maternal concern. She began pacing the room, running her hand along the back of an antique armchair, her eyes scanning the space as if she were appraising merchandise at an estate sale. "But maybe that's for the best. It'll make the transition easier if you're already lying down." "What are you doing here, Deborah?" I asked, dispensing with the mom title. We had passed the point of pleasantries years ago. "I'm sick. I don't have the energy for whatever drama you're pitching today." Ryan laughed, a sharp barking sound. He walked over to the fireplace and leaned against the mantel, crossing his arms. He looked at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "No drama, Nat, just business, family business." "We've come to give you a heads up," Deborah said, stopping in the center of the room. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. She didn't hand it to me, she tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap next to my flu medicine. "We didn't want you to be blindsided when the sheriff shows up later this week. We're being courteous." I stared at the envelope. "Courteous? What are you talking about?" "Open it," Ryan urged, his eyes gleaming. "Go on, read it and weep literally." My hands were trembling, partly from the fever and partly from a rising sense of dread, as I reached out and undid the clasp. I pulled out a stack of papers. The document on top was a terrifyingly official-looking deed transfer. I scanned the legalese, my forensic accountant brain automatically latching onto the keywords even through the fog of illness. Quitclaim deed, transfer of title, grantor, Natalia, grantee, Ryan. It was a document stating that I had voluntarily transferred the entire estate, the house, the land, the outbuildings, to Ryan. It was dated 4 days ago. It had a signature at the bottom that looked frighteningly like mine. "What is this?" I whispered, looking up at them. "It's the deed," Ryan said, stepping forward, his chest puffed out. "We fixed Grandpa's mistake. The house is mine now." Mom helped me file the paperwork at the county clerk's office on Friday. "It's done, recorded, official." "You forged my signature," I said, my voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "This is fraud. You can't just sign a house over to yourself." "Oh, but we had a witness," Deborah said smoothly, her smile tight and cruel. "And a notary who was very understanding of our family situation. As far as the law is concerned, you signed it. You gave it to your brother because you knew it was the right thing to do." Ryan leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You have until Friday to get your stuff out. I've got contractors coming Saturday morning to gut the kitchen. We're modernizing, getting rid of all this old junk." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the greed, the entitlement, the absolute lack of conscience. I looked at the forged signature, the audacity of the theft. They had planned this. They had waited until I was weak, orchestrated a felony, and now stood in the house I had saved, telling me to leave. The betrayal hit me harder than the fever ever could. It wasn't just the theft of property, it was the theft of safety, the violation of the sanctuary I had built. But as I looked at the papers again, a cold, hard knot formed in my chest. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, I thought, but they had made one critical calculation error. For a long minute, I didn't say anything. I just let the papers rest in my lap, my thumb tracing the edge of the forgery. My silence seemed to embolden them. They took it for submission. They took it for shock. "I know it's a lot to process," Deborah said, her voice dropping to that patronizing, faux sympathetic tone she used when she was trying to manipulate someone. "But really, Natalia, what were you going to do with a place this size? You're a single woman, you work all the time. It's too much for you. Ryan is a man, he needs a legacy. He needs a foundation to start his empire." "His empire?" I repeated flatly. "You mean the vape shop he tried to open in a garage, or the dropshipping business that lost $10,000. "Those were learning experiences," Ryan snapped, his face flushing red. He pushed off the mantle and began pacing aggressively. "I'm an entrepreneur. You wouldn't understand. You're just a number cruncher. You have no vision. This house, it's sitting on a gold mine. I'm going to subdivide the back lot, sell off 2 acres, and use the capital to renovate the main house into luxury rentals. It's going to generate passive income for the rest of my life." My heart hammered against my ribs. Subdivide the land? Sell off the gardens Grandpa had planted 50 years ago? Turn the library where Grandma taught me to read into a rental unit? The nausea from the flu surged, but I swallowed it down. "You can't do that," I said, keeping my voice low. "Grandpa explicitly wanted the estate kept intact. That was his condition." "Grandpa is dead," Deborah said coldly. "And his conditions died with him. He was senile at the end, Natalia. Everyone knows that. Leaving the house to you was a lapse in judgment. He wasn't thinking clearly. He forgot that Ryan is the carrier of the family name." "I kept his name," I pointed out. "I never changed it." "It's not the same," she dismissed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Ryan is the son. It should have been his. We're just correcting a clerical error." She walked over to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked garden. "Besides, we've already listed your apartment in the city as your primary residence on the transfer forms, so you're not homeless. You can just go back to your little life. Leave the heavy lifting to the men." The misogyny was so casual, so ingrained in her worldview, that it barely registered as an insult anymore. It was just background noise. But as she spoke, as she laid out their plan, the liquidation of my heritage, the erasure of my grandparents' wishes, something inside me shifted. The feverish fog began to recede, replaced by a razor-sharp, icy clarity. I looked down at the quitclaim deed again. It was a decent forgery. Ryan had practiced my signature. I could see the hesitation marks in the loops of the N where he had tried to mimic my flair. They had gone to the county. They had filed it. They had created a public record. In their minds, they had already won. They were standing in their living room, evicting a trespasser. So, I said, slowly swinging my legs off the couch and sitting up. I felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly, but I forced myself to plant my feet on the floor. You want me out by Friday. Friday at noon, Ryan said, checking his watch as if he had a busy schedule. I have the movers coming at 1. I don't want to see a single box of your stuff left behind. Anything you leave, I'm throwing in a dumpster. And if I don't leave? I asked. Deborah turned from the window, her eyes narrowing. Then we call the S. Harif, this deed is legal proof of ownership, Natalia. If you stay, you're trespassing. Do you really want to be dragged out of here in handcuffs in front of the neighbors? Think about your precious reputation. A forensic accountant arrested for squatting? That wouldn't look good on a background check. She had thought of everything. She had weaponized my own career, my need for order and legality against me. I see, I said. I picked up the envelope and slowly slid the forged deed back inside. You've been very thorough. We had to be, Ryan sneered. You always think you're smarter than everyone else, but you didn't see this coming, did you? I looked at him, meeting his gaze directly. No, Ryan, I didn't think even you would stoop to a felony. It's not a felony if it's justice, he shouted, his temper flaring. Okay, I said softly. Okay, if the paperwork is filed then, I guess there's nothing I can do right now, is there? Deborah's shoulders relaxed. She let out a breath she had been holding. She had expected a fight, a screaming match. My resignation confused her, but she accepted it because it was what she wanted. Exactly. It's done. Just pack your things, Natalia. It's for the best. They turned to leave, arrogant and assured. Ryan actually high-fived the air as he walked toward the door. Friday, he yelled over his shoulder. Noon, don't make me call the cops. The heavy door slammed shut again, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for a long time, the envelope resting on my knees. My head throbbed, but a small, cold smile touched my lips. They had gone to the courthouse. They had forged a signature. They had created a paper trail of fraud that led directly to them. They thought the house was in my name. They thought all they had to do was transfer Natalia's property to Ryan's property. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that the moment Grandpa died, I hadn't just moved in. I had done my job. To understand why they did this, why my own mother and brother would conspire to render me homeless, you have to understand the last 3 years. While Deborah was finding herself on a series of cruises paid for by her latest divorce settlement, and while Ryan was bouncing between failed startups and crashing on friends' couches, I was here. I was here when Grandpa was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I was here when Grandma fell and broke her hip, triggering a rapid decline into dementia. I moved my office into the guest bedroom. I cut my client list in half. My nights weren't spent socializing or dating. They were spent changing IV bags, managing a complex schedule of 14 different medications, and sitting by bedsides listening to the labored breathing of the 2 people who had actually raised me. Deborah visited twice in 3 years. Both times, she stayed for less than an hour, complained about the smell of disinfectant, and asked Grandpa if he had considered liquidating some stocks to help Ryan out. Ryan never came, not once. He claimed he was too empathetic and couldn't handle seeing them like that. When they passed, Grandma first, then Grandpa 3 months later, the grief was a physical weight I carried alone. The funeral was a spectacle. Deborah threw herself on the casket, wailing for an audience, while Ryan stood by the grave wearing sunglasses, checking his phone. Then came the reading of the will. Mr. Miles, my grandparents' attorney for 40 years, read it in this very room. He was an old-school lawyer, a man of few words and immense integrity. He read the clause clearly. To my daughter, Deborah, I leave the sum of $5,000, creating no further claim to the estate. To my grandson, Ryan, I leave the sum of $5,000. To my granddaughter, Natalia, who stood by us when the world faded away, I leave the entirety of the estate, including the property, the investments, and the residuals. The explosion was immediate. Deborah screamed that I had manipulated them. Ryan threw a vase against the wall, a vase Grandma had brought back from Italy in 1968. They threatened to sue. They threatened to burn the place down. But Mr. Miles had held firm. The will was ironclad. There were video recordings of Grandpa signing it, declaring his sound mind. There were doctor's notes verifying his cognitive state on the day of the signing. They couldn't fight the will, so they decided to steal the house instead. I looked at the empty space where they had stood just moments ago. Deborah, the enabler-in-chief. A woman who had never worked a day in her life, who believed her beauty was a currency that would never devalue, even as she aged into bitterness. She saw me not as a daughter, but as competition and later as a bank. She hated that I was independent. She hated that I didn't need her. And Ryan, the golden child. He was 28 years old and still acted like a frat boy on spring break. He had a charm that worked on strangers for a boo. 10 minutes until the narcissism started to seep through. He believed the world owed him a living because he was special. He was brilliant. He was just unlucky. Together, they were a dangerous feedback loop. Deborah fed Ryan's ego, telling him he was destined for greatness, and Ryan fed Deborah's victim complex, agreeing that the world, and specifically me, was mistreating them. I stood up, the room swaying slightly less now. I walked over to the antique desk in the corner of the room. It was locked. I pulled the key from the chain around my neck, a habit I had developed since the funeral, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a simple black folder. It wasn't flashy. It didn't look like much. But inside that folder were the documents Mr. Miles and I had drafted the week after the funeral. I wasn't just a granddaughter. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days tracking hidden assets, uncovering embezzlement, and shielding clients from liability. I knew that inheriting $2 million in assets and a prime piece of real estate made me a target. I knew my family. I knew they wouldn't stop at a shouting match. So I had taken steps. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Mr. Miles' contact. I could call him now. I could tell him about the forgery. We could have the police here in an hour. But then I thought about Ryan's smirk. I thought about Deborah's threat to have me handcuffed. I thought about the contractors coming to gut my grandmother's kitchen. If I stopped them now, they would just claim it was a misunderstanding. They would say they thought they had permission. They would get a slap on the wrist, a probation officer, and they would be back in 6 months with a new scam. No. To stop them permanently, I needed them to commit. I needed them to walk into the trap and close the door behind themselves. I needed them to try to enforce that fraudulent deed. I dialed the number. "Mr. Miles," I said when he answered, my voice steady despite the fever. "Natalia, you sound terrible," the gruff voice replied. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, looking at the rain falling on the driveway where my brother had just peeled out. "Ryan and Deborah were just here. They forged a deed. They transferred the house to Ryan's name." There was a moment of silence on the line, then a low, dangerous chuckle. "They did what?" "They forged a quitclaim deed. They think the house is in my name, Mr. Miles. They think they stole it from me." "Oh dear," Mr. Miles said, though he didn't sound distressed. He sounded like a hunter who just heard a twig snap. "They really didn't do their due diligence, did they?" "No, they didn't. They want me out by Friday. They're bringing movers." "Friday," Mr. Miles repeated. "Well, I suppose I should clear my schedule. Do you want me to call the district attorney now?" "Not yet," I said, a cold resolve settling in my gut. "Let them come. Let them bring the movers. Let them bring the police. I want them to feel like they've won. I want them to stand on that porch and demand the keys. And then, I said, we show them the folder." I spent Wednesday and Thursday in a state of quiet, methodical preparation. The fever finally broke on Wednesday night, leaving me weak but clear-headed. I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I turned the dining room table into a war room. My first call was to the county clerk's office. I needed to see the damage for myself. I accessed the public records online, and there it was, Image 2020-489901. A quitclaim deed filed at 4:15 p.m. last Friday. The image on the screen was grainy, but the audacity was high definition. My signature, shaky and looped incorrectly, sat above a notary stamp from a Brenda J. Miller in a neighboring town. I looked up Brenda. Her notary license was active, but a quick search of her social media showed her tagged in photos with Ryan from a bar called The Rusty Anchor 3 weeks ago. So, she's a friend, I thought, or a date. Either way, she had just risked a felony conviction for a guy who probably wouldn't pay for her drink. I printed the deed, I printed the notary's information, I printed the timestamp. Then I went deeper. If they were this confident, they had likely already started spending money they didn't have. I used my professional tools, databases that forensic accountants use to track liabilities, to run a soft inquiry on Ryan. It was worse than I thought. In the 4 days since owning the house, Ryan had applied for 3 high-interest loans against the property's equity. He hadn't been approved yet. Title searches take time, and the fraud would have been caught eventually, but the applications were there. He was trying to leverage the estate for $400,000 in cash. He was going to bleed the property dry before the ink was even dry on his fake deed. But the real smoking gun came from a call to the local utilities. I called the electric company, pretending to be inquiring about a transfer of service. "Oh, yes," the cheerful representative said. "Mr. Ryan has already scheduled the switch. He requested the billing be moved to his name starting this Friday. He also asked to add a secondary authorized user, a Deborah." "Okay," I said, my hand tightening on the phone. "Thank you, I just wanted to confirm." They were moving fast. They weren't just taking the house, they were erasing me from it completely. Thursday afternoon, I met Mr. Miles at a small diner halfway between the estate and his office. I didn't want him coming to the house. I had a feeling Ryan might be doing drive-bys to check on his prize. Mr. Miles looked exactly as he had for 30 years, 3-piece suit, pocket watch, and an expression that could curdle milk. He slid a thick binder across the table. "I took the liberty of contacting the sheriff myself," Mr. Miles said, sipping his black coffee. "Sheriff Higgins, you remember him, he used to play chess with your grandfather." "I remember," I said. "Does he know what's happening?" "He knows enough," Mr. Miles said. "He knows there's a dispute. He knows there might be a disturbance on Friday. He agreed to have a deputy on standby just down the road, but I told him not to intervene until we signal." He tapped the binder. "This contains the certified copy of the trust, the date of transfer, which, as you know, was 5 months ago, and the affidavit regarding the fraud. It's bulletproof, Natalia. Legally, Ryan transferred a property you didn't own. You can't give away what you don't have. The deed is void ab initio from the beginning." "But the intent," I said, flipping through the pages. "The intent to defraud is real." "Exactly," Mr. Miles smiled grimly. "That's the beauty of it. If they had just forged a will, it would be a civil matter in probate court. But by forging a deed and filing it with a government entity, that's offering a false instrument for filing. That's a felony. And trying to secure loans against it, that's attempted bank fraud." He looked at me over his spectacles. "You sure you want to do this? We could just have them arrested at their apartment." "No," I said, closing the binder. "They need to come to the house. They need to stand on that porch and try to throw me out. I want them to see the look on my face when they realize they haven't taken anything. I want them to know that Grandpa's legacy is untouchable." Mr. Miles nodded. "Very well, I'll be there at 11:30 via the back entrance." Friday morning dawned gray and humid. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with impending storms. I dressed carefully. I didn't wear sweatpants or pajamas. I put on a tailored black blazer, dark jeans, and boots. I put on light makeup to hide the lingering pallor from the flu. I wanted to look like the owner. I wanted to look like the professional I was. At 11:45 a.m., a large moving truck rumbled up the long driveway, its air brakes hissing as it stopped right in front of the main steps. 5 minutes later, Ryan's car pulled up behind it. I watched from the living room window, hidden by the sheer curtains. Ryan stepped out, wearing aviator sunglasses despite the clouds. He was clapping his hands together, shouting directions at the movers who were hopping out of the cab. Deborah got out of the passenger side, holding a clipboard like she was the foreman of a job site. My heart was pounding, a hard, rhythmic thud against my ribs. This was it. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the wide, wraparound porch. "Hey," Ryan shouted, spotting me. He jogged up the steps, bypassing the movers. "You're still here. I told you noon, Natalia. It's 11:55. Why aren't there boxes outside?" "I'm not leaving, Ryan," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. Deborah marched up the steps, her heels clicking on the wood. "Don't be difficult, Natalia. The truck is here. These men are paid by the hour. Either you start carrying things out, or they start carrying things out for you." "You can't evict me," I said, crossing my arms. "This is my house." "Not anymore," Ryan laughed, pulling a folded copy of the forged deed from his back pocket and waving it in the air like a flag. "See this? It's recorded. It's legal. The county says I own this place. You're trespassing." He turned to the movers, two burly guys who looked confused and uncomfortable. "Guys, start with the living room. Anything that looks expensive, wrap it up. The rest goes to the curb." One of the movers hesitated, looking at me. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" "No," I said loudly, projecting my voice. "Do not enter this house. If you step through that door, you are aiding in a burglary." The mover froze, taking a step back. "Don't listen to her," Deborah shrieked. "She's just bitter. My son owns this property. Show them the paper, Ryan." Ryan shoved the paper toward the mover's face. "See, grantee, Ryan, that's me, now do your job. I'm giving you one last chance." To leave," I said to Ryan and Deborah. "Get in your car, take the truck, go home. If you try to force this, you are going to regret it for the rest of your lives." "Regret it?" Ryan sneered, stepping into my personal space. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. You stole this from me, Nat. Grandpa owed me. Now move, or I will physically move you." He reached out, grabbing my arm to pull me away from the door. "That's assault," a deep voice boomed from inside the house. Ryan froze. He dropped my arm. The front door opened fully, and Mr. Miles stepped out. He was tall, imposing, and looking at Ryan with the disdain one reserves for a particularly annoying insect. "Mr. Miles," Deborah gasped, her hand going to her throat. "What are you doing here?" "I'm representing the owner of this estate," Mr. Miles said, adjusting his cuffs, "and helping her protect it from trespassers." "The owner is right here," Ryan yelled, pointing at his chest. "I have the deed." "You have a piece of paper," Mr. Miles said calmly, "and a very poorly forged one at that, but even if the signature were real, it wouldn't matter." Ryan blinked. "What? Of course it matters. She signed it." "She couldn't sign it, Ryan," I said, stepping forward next to Mr. Miles. "Because I don't own the house." The silence on the porch was absolute. The movers were watching like it was a reality TV show. "What do you mean you don't own it?" Deborah whispered. "The will, you got everything." "I did," I said. "And 5 months ago, knowing that you two would eventually try something exactly like this, something greedy, desperate, and illegal, I transferred the title." I held up the black folder I had been holding behind my back. "I moved the house, the land, and every single investment account into an irrevocable trust," I said. "The grandparents' legacy trust. I am the beneficiary, I am the trustee, but I am not the owner on the title. The trust is." Mr. Miles smiled. "Which means, Ryan, that when you forged Natalia's signature on that deed last week, you were trying to transfer an asset she didn't legally hold in her personal name. You can't quitclaim a property you don't hold title to. Your deed is a legal impossibility." Ryan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked down at the paper in his hand, then back at me. Trust? What? What does that mean? It means, I said, that you forged a government document for absolutely nothing. You stole nothing, you gained nothing, but you did create proof of a crime. You're lying, Ryan stammered, his face draining of color. The arrogance was evaporating, replaced by a frantic, cornered panic. That's just legal mumbo-jumbo. I went to the clerk. They stamped it. It's in the system. Errors happen in the system all the time, Mr. Miles said. Especially when fraudsters lie on the forms, but the title search takes precedence. And the title search shows the trust has owned this home since last October. No, Deborah shouted, suddenly lunging forward. You can't do this. You tricked him. You hid the assets to trap him. I protected the assets, I corrected her, my voice hard. I protected them from exactly this, from people who think they are entitled to things they didn't earn. We're family, Deborah wailed, tears starting to stream down her face, the weaponized tears I had seen 1,000 times. How can you be so cruel? He's your brother. He just wanted his fair share. Grandpa was confused. We were just fixing it. Fixing it with a felony? I asked. You forged my name, Mom. You tried to throw me out on the street. You were going to let the movers empty my house while I was recovering from the flu. Where was the family then? We wouldn't have let you starve, she cried, grasping at straws. We would have given you something, a rental. Ryan was going to be generous once the business took off. The business? I scoffed. I saw the loan applications, Ryan. $400,000. You were going to mortgage this place to the hilt and gamble it away on another, sure thing. You would have lost the house within a year. Ryan looked at the movers. Don't listen to them, just grab the couch, grab something. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I wouldn't do that, son, the lead mover said, crossing his huge arms. I'm not touching anything. In fact, he pulled out his phone. I'm calling my boss. This job is canceled. You can't cancel? Ryan screamed, his voice cracking. He looked wild now, dangerous. He turned back to me, his fists clenched. Give me the keys now. I don't care about your trust. I'm moving in. I'm living here. Try and stop me. Ryan, stop, Deborah pleaded, sensing the shift in the air. Let's just go. We can. We can get a lawyer. We'll fight the trust. No, Ryan shoved her hand away. I'm not leaving. It's mine. I deserve it. He lunged for the door handle. That's enough, Mr. Mill, said sharply. He raised his hand, signaling toward the end of the driveway. From behind the dense hedge of rhododendrons near the gate, a white cruiser pulled out. It had been sitting there silently the whole time. The lights didn't flash, but the presence was unmistakable. Ryan froze, his hand inches from the doorknob. You called the cops, he whispered, looking at me with pure hatred, on your own brother. You committed fraud against your own sister, I replied. You broke the law, Ryan. I didn't make you do that. You did it yourself. The cruiser rolled slowly up the driveway and parked behind Ryan's car, effectively boxing him in. Sheriff Higgins stepped out. He was a big man, slow-moving but with eyes that missed nothing. He adjusted his hat and walked up the porch steps. Afternoon, Miss Natalia, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Mr. Miles. Sheriff, I nodded. Higgins turned to Ryan and Deborah. He looked at the paper still clutched in Ryan's hand. Is that the deed in question? Ryan crumpled the paper behind his back. No, it's nothing. We were just leaving. I don't think so, Higgins said, his voice dropping an octave. We had a call from the county clerk this morning, prompted by Mr. Miles here. Seems there's a discrepancy with a filing, and I believe that document you're holding is evidence. It's a misunderstanding, Deborah cried, stepping in front of Ryan like a human shield. He didn't mean to, he thought. He thought Natalia said it was okay. It was a joke, a prank. A prank? I asked, incredulous. You hired movers for a prank. You applied for loans for a prank. Hand over the paper, son, Higgins said, extending a hand. He wasn't asking. Ryan looked at the sheriff, then at the movers, then at his car. For a split second, I thought he was going to run, but he just slumped. The fight went out of him. He handed the crumpled forgery to the sheriff. "Ryan Michael," Higgins read the name on the deed. "I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." "No," Deborah screamed, grabbing the sheriff's arm. "You can't arrest him. Arrest her. She trapped him." "Ma'am, step back or you'll be joining him for obstruction," Higgins warned. He spun Ryan around. The click of the handcuffs was loud in the sudden silence of the afternoon. "This is your fault," Ryan yelled at me as the sheriff marched him down the steps. "You ruined everything, you selfish witch. I hope you die alone in this big empty house." I didn't flinch. I watched them take him. I watched Deborah running after them, sobbing, her heels sinking into the wet grass, her dignity completely gone. I turned to Mr. Miles. "Is it over?" He shook his head slowly. "Not quite. The arrest is just the beginning. Now comes the court case. And I have a feeling your mother hasn't played her last card yet." The arrest should have been the end of it. In a normal world, watching your son get handcuffed for a felony would be a wake-up call. But the narcissist's playbook doesn't have a chapter on accepting defeat. It only has escalate. Ryan made bail 24 hours later. Deborah, in a move that was both tragic and infuriating, had put up her own condo, her only remaining asset, as collateral to get him out. By Sunday, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't the victim of fraud anymore. I was the vindictive sister who had humiliated the family. My phone had been vibrating nonstop with texts from aunts, cousins, and distant relatives I hadn't seen since the funeral. "How could you do this to your brother? Family settles things at home, not with the police. Your mother is distraught. Come to Aunt Linda's house. Sunday dinner. We need to talk." It was a summons, a tribunal. Mr. Miles advised me not to go. "You have the law on your side, Natalia. You don't need to justify yourself to a jury of enablers." "I know I don't need to," I told him, looking at the fresh stack of documents he had uncovered during the discovery phase of the investigation. "But if I don't kill this narrative now, they will spend the rest of their lives painting me as the villain. I need them to see the truth, all of it." I pulled up to Aunt Linda's house at 5:00 p.m. The driveway was full. It looked like a holiday gathering, except the atmosphere was thick with judgment. When I walked into the living room, the conversation died instantly. There were about 15 people there, my mother's side of the family. They were sitting on couches and folding chairs, plates of lasagna balanced on their knees. In the center of the room sat Deborah and Ryan. Deborah looked frail, clutching a tissue, performing the role of the grieving matriarch perfectly. Ryan sat next to her, looking cleaner and more humble than he had on my porch, but his eyes were hard and watchful. "You have some nerve showing up here," Aunt Linda said, standing up. She was Deborah's older sister and the family bulldozer. "After what you did." "I was invited," I said calmly, clutching my black folder, my shield. "You wanted to talk, so let's talk." "We want you to drop the charges," Uncle Mike said from the corner. Ryan made a mistake. He didn't know the technicalities of the deed. He thought he was just claiming his birthright. You don't send family to prison over paperwork. "It wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "And it wasn't just paperwork. It was a calculated attempt to steal a $2 million estate and leave me homeless." "He wouldn't have kicked you out," Deborah cried out, her voice trembling. "He would have let you stay in the carriage house. He loves you, Natalia. He just wanted to manage the property because he has the business mind." Ryan nodded solemnly. "I was trying to save the estate, Nat. You're overwhelmed. I saw the roof leaking. I was going to fix it. I just wanted to help." A murmur of agreement went through the room. "See, he's a good boy. He just wanted to help." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I let it turn into fuel. I opened the folder. "Save the estate?" I asked. "Is that why you applied for a $400,000 hard money loan at 12% interest?" I pulled out the loan application I had subpoenaed. I held it up. "This isn't a mortgage for repairs. This is a cash-out loan. the kind you take when you want fast money and don't care about the repayment. I needed capital for the renovations, Ryan stammered, shifting in his seat. Renovations? I pulled out another sheet. I have the contractor's estimate you submitted with the loan. It includes $50,000 for a home theater and $80,000 for a luxury pool. Grandpa's garden? You were going to pave it for a pool deck. The room got quieter. The older relatives loved that garden. That's just a draft, Ryan said, sweating now. And what about Mom? I asked, turning to Deborah. You said he was going to build an empire. You said he was going to take care of you. Of course he was, Deborah said, lifting her chin defiantly. We're partners. Partners, I repeated. I looked at her with genuine pity. This was the moment that would break her, but also the moment that might save her. Ryan needed a guarantor for the loan, I said slowly, because his credit score is 500. He couldn't use the house because the title wasn't clear yet, so he used a cosigner. I pulled out the final document. It was a credit authorization form. He used your name, Deborah. He used your social security number. And he listed your condo, your only home, as the secondary collateral. Deborah froze, the tissue fell from her hand. What? He put your condo up against the loan, I explained, handing the paper to Aunt Linda, who snatched it and read it with widening eyes. If he defaulted, which he would have within months, the bank wouldn't just take the estate. They would have taken your condo. You would have been on the street, Mom, with nothing. Deborah turned to Ryan slowly. Her face was pale, her expression a mask of absolute shock. Ryan, is this true? You signed my house away. Ryan stood up, knocking his chair over. I had to. It was the only way to get the money fast. I was going to pay it back. It was an investment. You risked my home, Deborah whispered, her voice rising to a shriek. I bilayed you out, I gave you everything, and you were going to make me homeless. You don't understand business, Ryan yelled, his mask slipping completely. You're just an old woman, you don't need that condo. We were going to live in the mansion. Who cares about your stupid apartment? The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a spell breaking. Deborah stood up. She was shaking, but not with sadness anymore. She was shaking with the rage of a woman who had sacrificed her entire moral compass for a child who just called her useless. She walked up to him. For a second, I thought she was going to hug him. Instead, she slapped him. It was a sharp, cracking sound that echoed off the walls. I lied for you, she hissed. I told the sheriff I was with you when you signed the deed. I perjured myself for you. She turned to me, her eyes wild. Natalia, the notary, Brenda. Shut up, Mom, Ryan panicked, grabbing her arm. She ripped her arm away. No, I'm done. Brenda didn't witness anything. Ryan paid her $500 to stamp the paper. I have the texts on my phone. I have them. She fumbled into her purse, pulling out her phone with trembling hands. I'm not losing my condo for you. I'm not going to jail for you. Not after this. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but these were real. He was going to take my home, Natalia, after everything I did. I know, I said softly. Deborah turned to the family. He's a liar, he's a thief, and I helped him, but I'm not helping him anymore. She tapped her screen and held it up to Aunt Linda. Here, read the text where he laughs about bribing Brenda. Ryan looked around the room. He saw his uncles standing up, their faces dark. He saw his free ride evaporating. He saw the golden child, status turning into ash. He didn't scream, he didn't fight, he just shrank. He looked suddenly very small, very young, and very alone. The fallout was swift and absolute. With Deborah's testimony and the text messages she provided to the district attorney, Ryan's defense crumbled. He pleaded guilty to grand larceny and forgery to avoid a trial that would have publicly aired even more of his dirty laundry. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for elder abuse or inheritance fraud, gave him a lecture during sentencing that made the local papers. She called his actions a parasitic dismantling of a family legacy. Deborah didn't get off scot-free, but her cooperation earned her leniency. She received 5 years of probation and community service, but the real punishment was the social exile. The partners were no more. She lost her standing in her social circles, and she nearly lost her condo to the legal fees, barely scraping by. 3 months after the sentencing, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I was in the garden. I was pruning the rose bushes Grandpa had planted, wearing thick gloves, the smell of damp earth grounding me. The estate was quiet. The for sale signs Ryan had dreamed of were never planted. The house remained. The trust was secure. I heard the crunch of gravel and looked up. Deborah's car, an older model now, she had sold the luxury sedan, pulled up to the gate. She didn't drive in. She parked outside and walked to the fence. I put down my shears and walked over. She looked older. The heavy makeup was gone, replaced by a simpler look. She looked tired. "I didn't want to come in," she said, keeping her hands on the iron rails of the gate. "I know I'm not welcome." "No," I said honestly, "you're not." She nodded, accepting that. I wanted to give you this." She reached through the bars and handed me a small, velvet box. I took it. Inside was Grandma's pearl necklace. The one Deborah had claimed was lost years ago. "I took it," she admitted. "Before the funeral, I wanted to sell it, but I didn't." "Why give it back now?" I asked. "Because it belongs to the house," she said. She looked past me at the sprawling Victorian mansion standing proud against the blue sky. "And because I realized something, Natalia, in that courtroom." She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw her look at me with respect. Not love, perhaps, that bridge was too burned, but respect. "You are exactly like your grandfather," she said. "He knew. That's why he left it to you. He knew you were the only one strong enough to stop us." I said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For the deed, for the lies, for everything." "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I refused to carry the weight of her anger anymore. The trust protected the house, forgiveness protected my peace. But that doesn't mean we go back to how it was. You have your life, Mom, I have mine. "I know," she said. She stepped back from the gate. "Goodbye, Natalia." "Goodbye, Deborah." I watched her drive away. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I walked back up the driveway, the pearls clutched in my hand. I walked up the porch steps, past the spot where Ryan had tried to evict me, and opened the heavy oak door. Inside, the house was warm. The smell of lemon polish and old books greeted me. I walked into the library and placed the pearls on the mantel, right next to the photo of Grandma and Grandpa. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in Grandpa's leather chair. I looked around at the walls, the books, the legacy. It was safe. It was whole. I had faced the people who were supposed to love me, and I had seen them for who they were. I had stood my ground. I hadn't let them take a single brick. I took a sip of tea and smiled. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was victorious.